Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. Before starting our show tonight, I would like to take a moment to honor the victims of the recent Hamas terrorist attack in Israel. October 7th, 2023 was meant to be a sacred holiday, but instead it became the single deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, with more than 1,300 people killed, including at least 31 Americans. Over 200 hostages taken by Hamas remain in Gaza. The subsequent war has left nearly 1 million Palestinians in Gaza displaced and several thousand dead. As the conflict continues to unfold, my thoughts will be with the victims in Israel and Gaza, as well as with their families. And on that note, on with the show. Our guest tonight is Delegate Ken Plum. Delegate Plum is a Democratic member of the Virginia House of Delegates, representing the 7th District, previously the 36th, since 1982. He earlier served from 1978 through 1980. His district includes a large part of Fairfax County, including the entirety of Reston. After 44 years of public service, he announced at the end of the 2023 session that he is retiring. Delegate Plum, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Mary, thank you for having me. 44 years is a long time. I didn't start off to set any records, but it turned out I'm currently the longest serving member of the House.
Really?
And you may be interested to know, the clerk pointed out to me that I'm the second longest serving member ever in the House of Delegates. Going back 400 years, I'm the second longest guy to serve.
Wow, that's amazing. So we have a full hour together tonight, so I thought it would be great to start at the beginning, or at least your beginning. So let's take it all the way back to your upbringing. And although you've served in Fairfax for the last few decades, you actually didn't grow up in Fairfax. I believe you were born in Shenandoah, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in a little country road called Crooked Run in Page County, which is in the Shenandoah Valley. And I went to public schools. We didn't have kindergarten in those days, but I went the first 7 years to Grove Hill Elementary, and then graduated from Shenandoah High School, which now is turned into Shenandoah Elementary School. It has one of the oldest alumni associations in the country, and I still periodically go up to the alumni gatherings. We had 41 in our graduating class, and there are about 15 or so of us remaining. The others have passed on.
So what was growing up there like? What did your parents do at that time?
Well, I had a very humble beginning. My dad had never been to public schools. My mom had a couple of years of elementary school. So going to school was an incredible delight for me because we had no books in our home and little opportunity to learn, but I had unending curiosity. So school was so meaningful and so important to me. And my interest in education, I guess, emanates from that, and it continues to today. But I grew up playing in the sand along the banks of the Crooked Run Creek. My brothers and my father were more outdoorsmen. I was more the guy who did the dishes. We didn't have running water, so you heated some water in the dish pan and did the dishes. But it's a very basic beginning, but I still remind myself and remind others that the basics that I learned from that. While I say my dad had no formal education, he was really a smart guy. One of the things, since we had limited resources, was to fix things ourselves. So looking at something that breaks or something around the house, you view it as a problem and you become a problem solver. So you start using your brain to get things done. And likewise, he had a lot of fundamental beliefs, like if a man's paying you to work for a day, you give him a day's work. In other words, you don't do any cheating on anybody. And number two, you treat everybody like you'd like to be treated. And those seem like such basic fundamental lessons, but they've been part of me from the beginning, and I'm really blessed by having that background.
And so you were born in 1941 during World War II, and history is something that I'm very fascinated by. It's hard to believe that for someone like me who grew up in the 90s, that that's something that actually happened. It just feels like a movie. And obviously you were incredibly young at that time, but I was curious if you have any early memories of the war or the post-war era.
No, my memories primarily start during in my early years, started with what's left over from the Depression and what was happening during the Depression. I was very young during the Second World War, but my memories about my parents surviving during the Depression builds on that idea that they had to be problem solvers and do things themselves. In order to make a living, the community of Shenandoah is right near the Shenandoah National Park. And my parents would go out in the summer and fall and pick huckleberries. You know what a huckleberry is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little blueberry, and lots of people don't know that. But they would pick the wild ones, which are incredibly nutritious, and sell them to make a little money. We'd drive around the neighborhoods and pick up all the black walnuts we could. You know what a black walnut looks like when it falls off a tree? Well, it's about as big as a baseball. And that exterior, which is, again, almost an inch thick, is a pulpy something that if you handle it with your hands, you can hardly get the stain off your fingers. So the technique for them was to go pick them up in a big granny bag, take them to the back home, spread them out in the driveway, and as you drove your car over them for a week or two, it'd break all that exterior stuff off, and then you could pick up the nut, which is about so big. And the thing about black walnuts, you know the distinction between a black walnut and an English walnut?
I don't.
No, okay. Well, typically what you find at the grocery store is an English walnut, and it's very easy to break open. Black walnuts are hard as a rock. So when you break them open and take out the meat, it's very tasty, it's very special. And people around holiday times, for example, will use them to bake things like black walnut cakes. But the point being about all that is that we found a way to make a living in some hard times. And those are my early recollections. It turned out that my father was not in the war. He was kind of between wars. He did not serve in World War II either, but those were my recollections.
So the youth today, they're very interested in political topics and current events. Yeah. I'm curious if that was also the case when you were in high school.
Yeah, people ask me, well, how did you get so interested in politics? And I don't actually know the answer to that, other than the fact that it's true. That I was always interested in politics from the beginning. Mom or Dad were not involved in political life at all. They voted, I think most of the time, although I'm not totally sure about that. And my parents' expressions about politics was again primarily related to Franklin Roosevelt and his getting us out of the Great Depression. And so I think that's their explanation as to why they were Democrats. And a belief that the government ought to do something to help people live a better life. And I thought that, I heard that from the beginning, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that I became a Democrat, and I like the idea of what my father had to say about give a man a day's work for a day's pay. I like the idea that the government can play a role in making life more quality life for people. And so I became a Democrat. My 12th grade U.S. government teacher, Mrs. Boozer, sensed that I was really interested in this stuff. So she did a lot to kind of promote my interest. And we had the chairman of the Democratic Party of Page County come and speak to our class. And I raised my hand and I asked the question that I understand that vote buying goes on in Page County and it's through the absentee ballot. Is that true? And much to my amazement, he answered, yes, it is. And I said, well, why isn't something being done about it? And he says, because everyone does it. So when the chairman of the Republican committee came to our class to speak, I asked the question, is it true that vote buying goes on in Page County? And he said, yes, it does. And it's so both sides are doing it, and somehow it seems to make it right. So following up on that topic about how that worked, the way it worked was that you had to pay a poll tax to vote. And you could get an absentee ballot. So what the parties would do, both Democrats and Republicans, they would go around and promise to pay people's poll taxes if they would mark their absentee ballot the way they wanted it answered. So I wrote to the Secretary of the State Board of Elections, and they sent me the vote counts, both the votes that were cast as regular ballot and those that were cast as absentee ballots. And much to my amazement, it was obvious that in Page County, in every 4 years, when the local officials were up for election, the use of absentee ballots would go up to more than 30%. Now, across the state, the average was probably like 3 or 4%. But in Page County, and in a couple of counties in Southwest Virginia, this was occurring. So the fact about voter fraud going on, I found very offensive. But about that time, too, in my senior year, my guidance counselor had me in the office, and she said, now, Kenneth, it's time for you to think about going to college. I was flabbergasted. No one in my family had ever been to college. I didn't think I could go to college, but she assured me that it would be possible and I could. So after a year's delay from when I got out of school, I did go to college, convinced I'd never be able to make it because of my humble beginnings and so on, but I would work hard. And so I went to the Norfolk College of William and Mary for my beginning year, and I worked so hard to try to be successful. I made the dean's list. And suddenly I realized, gosh, I can do this stuff. And it was so exciting because while I thought public school K-12 or 1 to 12 was interesting, this stuff in college was fascinating. So I continued my studies, primarily focused on history and government, and I got a degree in 3.5 years in Bachelor of Arts in history and government. And so the story goes.
So I want to talk a little bit more about education and how that shaped you. So you were in high school when you found out about the vote buying.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I still have the term paper I wrote for which I got an A about how that happened and so on.
And let's talk a little bit about that after the break.
Sure.
We will be right back with more from Delegate Ken Plum after the short PSA. Stick around and come right back.
Caitlin, be serious. Now take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
You're not the kind of guy that makes the girls all sigh.
2 for $3.
They never turn their heads and look when you walk by. 'Cause it's the little things.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Helping.
What a nice young man.
Pass it on.
My goodness.
You are not what you got.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
I better get out of here. Hooey.
Get it.
Get it. Get it.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill. Bring good home.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are back with our guest, Delegate Ken Plum. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about your education background and going off to college. Can you recap what you did in college and where you went?
Yeah, I went off to the Norfolk College of William and Mary in Norfolk. That's now Old Dominion University. I went there because it was affordable. The fees and so on were lower than most other schools, and they also were willing to give me a scholarship to go there.
And coming out of college, what was your first job?
Well, when I got into school, I loved the academics so much and the liberal education so much that I didn't actually prepare for any particular job. I was too busy studying and having so much fun learning that I didn't prepare specifically for a job. So when I left college, I took just a general job in a business in the Valley, but wanting then to continue my interest in government and studies and so on, I got into a program at the University of Virginia. It was an internship program where I could finish a degree that included the studies of history and government, but it also gave me the credentials to become a teacher. And so when I entered that program, they placed me in the middle of the program in a school in Fairfax County, Edison High School, to be an intern teacher. And that's where I got my first teaching experience. And in order to kind of make ends meet, since I was only paid half-time because I was only teaching half-time as part of my experience, I taught evening school adults, and that really spun off to become a career for me because I became director of the Office of Adult and Community Education for Fairfax Schools. We had, I think, before I left, I worked there for 30 years. We had the largest public school adult education program in the country.
And from what I understand, your experience with adult education inspired you to get more involved in politics.
Yeah, well, what happened was that, of course, I was teaching, that was my job, but my continued interest was the community. So I was involved in the Community Relations Council. The Council on Human Relations was involved with desegregating the schools and desegregating the community. So I was actively working at finding ways in which we can bring black and white people together in a friendly community way. And I also then was working in local campaigns, and I don't want to sound too uppity about this, but working in some of the campaigns, I came to realize, I'm as smart, if not smarter, than some of these candidates. So why should I be electing someone else? Why not I should stand for office? Now, to tell you, to fill out the story is, I first ran in 1974 and lost. I ran in, or I should say 73 and lost. See, I've been involved almost a half century at this. 75 and lost. I won in 77, so that's that first term from 78 to 80. And doggone it, when I was running for re-election, I lost. So that's 3 losses, right? But on the next time I run, in 1981, I'm successful. And I ran 29 times after that, 26 of them successful for my total career. And I guess the moral of the story is I really wanted to do this, and I hung in there with it and stayed with it. And over a period of time, see, I was 30 years with Fairfax Schools, 44 years in the legislature, but you don't add those two together to understand my career because they overlapped. Remember, serving in the House of Delegates is a part-time job, but it became very obvious to me that, particularly in my years as an intern teacher, because I was teaching the kids who were the most difficult to teach, and it was obvious to me that we needed more resources and more programs to accommodate them. And so as Director of Adult Education, I started a number of alternative schools. And these were sometimes like one-room schoolhouses and so on in Fairfax, to take the kids who, for whatever reasons, couldn't make it through the regular school program. And there are reasons beyond their own capability to deal with. We were able to intervene and have them be successful. So as I think back, what's the most fulfilling thing I've done in life? It actually may have been what I was doing when I was running alternative programs for kids in need. But when I went to the legislature, I tried to get some of that into the budget funding for education and into some of the accommodations for degree requirements and so on. So anyway, I'm a fortunate guy to have had those experiences too.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your work supporting education, but first I want to touch on something that you mentioned, and that was the desegregation of public schools in Virginia.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about what that was like, living through that time, and what was going on politically, what your involvement was? I believe the schools shut down briefly.
Yeah, in some places it did. The community in which I grew up, there really weren't any black people, so I didn't have any experience as a young person. But the communities all around and throughout Virginia, by law, were segregated. The Constitution of Virginia said black and white students may not attend the same school. And so there was a public school program, and then there was an alternative program, another set of schools and so on, where black kids went to school. Well, in the early 1960s, and I lose track of the date right now, the children in Prince Edward County, which is down south of Richmond, looked at the new brick school where the white kids went and looked at the tar paper shanty where they went without indoor plumbing and without the heat was a potbelly stove, and thought there's something not fair about this. And of course there was a whole lot not fair about that. But a lady named, a 16-year-old kid named Barbara Johns organized the 300 kids in the black school. And they had called the principal on the phone and said, there's some kids downtown causing trouble. Can you come and stop them? So the principal leaves the school, and when the principal leaves the school, she has 300 kids walk out of the school. And so that was a dramatic occurrence where somebody in the black community was standing up. Parents were reluctant sometimes to stand up because they worked for the white people, and they knew that could be a threat to them. And in the worst of situations, of course, we were over periods of time when black people were lynched and so on. So there's a lot of fear on the part of the black community. But Barbara Johns was a spunky young woman. Now what are we going to do? Well, the NAACP, that was getting active then, decided to take on her case that the schools, the separate schools in Prince Edward County were not in any way equal. And the Oliver Hill was the attorney, Spotswood Robinson was the attorney. And incidentally, if you go to Richmond now and you go to the state capitol and you see the Civil Rights Memorial, it's a statue of Barbara Johns because of the dramatic effect that she had. So when the case went to the Supreme Court, it went as part of the Brown versus Board of Education case. So that when you think about it, when were Virginia schools desegregated, it came out of that 1954 decision. Brown versus Board of Education was made up of 7 cases that were consolidated into one, and the Virginia case was one of them. And the courts decided separate schools are inherently unequal. You can't have them unequal. It took the then Senator Harry F. Byrd, who was a senator from Virginia, who was the boss of the, quote, Democrats. And these people were not National Democrats, they were Dixiecrats. They were the conservative Democrats. Led something called massive resistance. And the theory was, if we simply refuse to do what the court said, not anything they can do about it. So we will establish a program of massive resistance. It took 40 cases over 10 years to finally knock off all that opposition to where Virginia finally had to desegregate its schools. And so it didn't happen in 1954. It happened in 1964 until finally schools were desegregated. A lot of ill feeling, a lot of fear left over, and so I became involved as a college student because Norfolk College, William and Mary, was built on the dividing line between the black and white communities. And so I saw up close firsthand what desegregation was doing. So the Council on Human Relations gave me a recognition because of my leadership of trying to bring our communities together. And it was a chilling experience to see the inhumanity of what some people do to others. And I was pleased to play a role in that, but I'm sorry it was a situation that I had to play a role in because it shouldn't have been that way. So anyway, I've spent most of my life working on equality, not only between the races, but also LGBTQ people and so on. I believe in equality of opportunity for everyone.
So I'm curious how desegregation affected your education and how much you were involved or how that affected your teaching.
It was only finally I got to college that I actually was able to interact with black students. Before that, I'd been in a lily white environment because that's what segregation had caused. And there was no way to get around that. But when I became an intern teacher, I was given the history textbook I was supposed to use, and it was a Virginia adopted textbook on Virginia's history, adopted by the state legislature. And I looked at the textbook, and I said to the school administrator who was supervising me, there's no way I can teach from this book because it's not an accurate book. It was a whitewashing of Virginia's history. It was totally inaccurate. I had a very enlightened administrator, and he said, do what you have to do. And what I did is use supplemental materials to try to have people understand what slavery was all about, what the Jim Crow laws were like, how it is that we had taken such actions to keep the black people under our toe. And so it greatly affected what I did, and I participated in the writing of a history book that was viewed as more objective and not when people talk about now about textbooks and they talk about the government providing the textbooks, don't go there, because the government has a perspective and it's not always a broad perspective.
It's that's something that I learned about in my history class.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very interesting to actually hear someone talk about it who lived through it.
Yeah.
And when you learn about these things as a kid, you just think about, like, that's a closed book, it's in the history book, it's done with.
Yep.
But it really wasn't that long ago.
Wasn't that long ago.
And when we come back from the break, I want to jump forward a little bit and talk more about your involvement in politics. Make sure to stick around after the break. We will be speaking more with Delegate Plum.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
See you, dude.
See ya. Remember me and you're well.
Nice life. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped out life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are continuing our conversation with Delegate Ken Plum. So before the break, we talked a little bit about desegregation, and you mentioned the Southern Dixiecrats, who were not national Democrats. And you still decided to enter politics as a Democrat. So can you talk a little bit about your decision and your thinking to getting politically active and what it was like at that time?
Sure. Mary, during that period of time, Virginia was dominated by Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats we call them, and dominated by the machine, the Harry Byrd machine. And I didn't like it because they didn't fund schools adequately. They kept the communities segregated, and so they weren't for the things that I believed in. And when I looked at running for office, I decided what I had to do is to take that machine on. Not that I single-handedly was somehow going to do it in, but somebody had to stand up and offer a different voice. And so it was the case, and as I indicated to you, I lost a few elections, but I stood firm on the idea that Virginia can do better by its children in its schools. It can be better in the community and building the community as we are open or fair with housing and so on. And so when I ran for office, I couldn't run as one of those people, but I ran with the National Democrats, right? So John Kennedy was my hero. Lyndon Johnson and his New Society program, I loved. Hubert Humphrey and his call for more social action and so on was what I believed in. So I go to Richmond in that first session. Of the 100 members of the House of Delegates, there's 76 Democrats and remaining Republicans. And of the 76 Democrats, I would say there were probably 12 of us that could be called National Democrats. So when I looked for people to hang around with, I hung around with as many moderate Republicans, because you see there were some people at that time who entered politics who looked at the way politics was represented and concluded they couldn't be a Southern Democrat. So they became a Republican. I looked at the Southern Democrats and said, I can't be one of those. I'm going to be a National Democrat. But we then collaborated on many things and so on. But during the course of that, you pay a cost for doing that because you're bucking up against the establishment. You don't always get your bills passed. In fact, many times you don't get your bills passed. But it seemed to me that somebody had to be a voice for a broader perspective of bringing Virginia into the modern era, because Virginia was really a backward state by then, and we needed to make the investments in economic development and health, mental health, and schools and so on to bring Virginia to modern day.
Can you explain, for those who are not aware, the Byrd machine, a little bit more about what that was and how it came to be?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the short answer because I actually would go back to Reconstruction after the Civil War to talk about how it is that in Virginia and in the South, initially it was the Republicans who took control of the South in government and so on. And it was in opposition to those Republicans that developed a Democratic Party in the South that was very conservative. They were anti-Republican. And in the Constitution of 1902, for example, that helped to set up the Virginia way, it disenfranchised half the population with a poll tax, for example. You had to pay to vote. And you know, it wasn't $1.50 that was the problem. The problem was you had to pay the $1.50 3 years in a row, 6 months before the election, in order to be able to vote. Now, most people, I don't know about you, but by then I would have forgotten to pay. And the way it worked was that the local commissioner of the revenue who collected the tax would remind you, but he wouldn't rely on a black person or he wouldn't rely on a liberal person. And so we did not have a high level of voter participation. So as the succession of leaders went, Harry Byrd became governor of Virginia, I believe it was 1928. And by governor standards, he was fairly progressive. He started a state transportation system as it was a horrible system. What was known in the East Coast was that if you're going from New York to Florida, you drive around Virginia, not through it, because you likely get stuck in the mud. In fact, Harry Byrd's campaign slogan was, "Let's get Virginia out of the mud." But he also was conservative on everything else. He was conservative in terms of segregating the community. He was stingy in terms of spending money, so he didn't like to spend money on frivolous things like schools and all that. So he took that over, and it took us until really like the 1980s, 70s, and 80s to get up enough people, and I happened to be an early one in opposition to them, but other people came out of Norfolk City and so on, became opponents to the Byrd machine, and finally the young people who were coming into the Byrd machine concluded that we couldn't operate the way we were running in the past because it kept Virginia as a backward state. So things emerged over time, but Harry Byrd was the guy who held it together for so long, and some of us took on the brunt of overcoming it.
So that a party shifting happened, and those Southern Dixiecrats shifted over more towards the Republican Party.
Yep.
And then the Republicans became the dominant party
Right.
in Virginia.
Right. So I developed a new group of friends.
Yeah, and I believe you're someone who's always been consistent about your opinion on redistricting, and that it should be something that's objective and fair and not based on partisan politics.
Right.
And you're probably the most consistent person on that one, because I believe you introduced a bill on it.
In 1982, right? I have 2 years of incumbency, and I'm saying to the majority party, you shouldn't be allowed to redistrict anymore. It should be an impartial process. And it's received with words like, are you crazy? Let's give up our power? And the answer is, yeah, that's the right thing to do. Now, my bill never got out of committee. It had just a brief hearing. But over the years, I introduced different versions of it, of how legislators, and the way I contended was, we cannot as legislators be fair about drawing our seats, our districts, because we have such a high self-interest in this thing. And the way the Byrd folks had been doing it was it kept the urban and suburban areas from getting representation. It would keep it down where the good old boys were in the country. And it would also keep black folks out of being able to be fairly represented in districts. So, as you know, starting in 1982, finally, the voters approved in, was it 2020?
Yeah, 2020, I think it was.
2018, 20, somewhere there about. The voters approved a redistricting, impartial redistricting process. Now, I picked up support from the Republicans near the end because they were in the minority and they were wanting to get a fair shake. Well, the Democrats took over, and they looked at my bill and they said they didn't like my bill. But it took a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to pass the amendments to the Constitution that the voters, when they got to the voters, overwhelmingly supported. And so we now have a redistricting plan. And some would say, well, it sure messed things up. It didn't mess things up. It put them on a rational par. And over time, Democrats realized it was going to seemingly diminish their power. I don't think ultimately that's going to happen. And certainly it was not intended to increase power of Republicans. It was to try to create a balance as best you can in terms of developing communities of interest. In the old days, they would just hook together a lot of precincts here and there that made no sense, and it made it more difficult for people to represent it. So anyway, yeah, that was a long fight, but it was the right thing to do, and I never apologized to my Democratic friends who got mad at me when I continued to push it when they looked like they had a chance of taking over.
Well, maybe now with the Republican sweep, maybe they'll, in retrospect, think it was a good idea, but who knows where we'll be 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So,
well, what we didn't know in mind would be that there would be a guy show up who's a multimillionaire who could buy his way into the governorship and fund a lot of races, and that kind of throws the thing off. That's another issue we need to deal with too, is campaign finance reform, but I will leave that to my successors to do that.
Yeah, we should talk about that more a little bit later. So when I actually ran in 2021, that was right after that redistricting vote. And so a lot of people came to me and said, I disagreed with his vote about this issue. So I'm going to do a protest vote and I'll vote for you, even though that was not necessarily the reason I was running. And I think that's something that you've changed my mind about from listening to you and your reasoning. But I'm curious, when you found out that you had a primary challenger, what did you think? Were you mad? Did you think,
who is this lady who has the audacity to run against me? So it was a new experience because I had been in office from 1982 to
2021?
2021.
Yeah.
And was never challenged in a primary. So suddenly you pop up and I'm thinking, what have I done wrong?
Yeah, so it was mostly my decision to run personally was not about you, but I think some broader happenings in the state and the party.
Yeah.
And as someone who's very involved, I'm someone who also does not feel like I can just sit down if there's something that's bothering me. I feel like I should do something about it.
Right.
And so running for office gives you a good platform to be able to discuss issues at a higher level. And so even though I wasn't successful, I at least felt good that I could talk about those things a little bit more. And I don't think I gave you too much trouble because you came out of it, I think, over 70%, and I think you raised some money off of it. I don't think you spent too much.
Well, I hope you felt that I treated you fairly and I was not offended in the fact that you ran. I actually thought it was good because what it did is it gave me a platform to discuss the issues. For so many years, I didn't have any opponent at all, or I had just a token opponent on the Republican side. So it was hard to engage the public, and I think one of my responsibilities as a leader would be to engage the public in these issues to develop an understanding that we can move forward on them and be more progressive as a state. That's what I was always wanting to be about. So you provided me an opportunity to do that. I told people that you were running against me, and a whole lot of people came to my rescue. So it worked out well for us both. So I commend you for your involvement and hope it'll continue.
Yeah, I think I always tell everyone that you handled it like a gentleman and you never made me feel unwelcome in the party after that. You even sent me some nice letters. And I do want to talk to you more about just the inter-party competition when we get back. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break for more discussion with Delegate Ken Plum.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy, and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are continuing our conversation tonight with Delegate Plum. So before the break, we were talking about our primary race, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about what you think of all of the inter-party competition and the progressives that are running. I'm curious your take if you think it's a good thing. Some people feel like it's a bad thing. What do you think?
Increased involvement is a good thing. As an incumbent, you may feel put upon, you may think it's inconvenient, but for the institution and for the community, it's a good thing. In fact, when we look at some of the problems we've had in the past, it's been lack of participation, lack of discussion, and so on. I also am not afraid of new ideas. I have shown, I think, as that redistricting thing was a brand new idea a long time ago, and I, from the very beginning, opposed capital punishment. I've been out front on a lot of things that I thought were important, but they only come about when you invite people into the process. I never was of an opinion that the office was mine. I was allowed to occupy it for a period of time, and I was honored by the fact that people were so supportive of me. I think I was a good fit, if you will, for the people of the district. But I encourage more participation. One has to be aware that it's a long-term commitment, and obviously I believe that. I have at home one pair of my shoes left over in my early campaign that literally have holes in the bottom from door knocking campaigns. You have to, if your idea is that I'm going to get elected and I'm going to Richmond, I'm going to show them what to do and everything's going to change, you're probably going to be really disappointed, because it's the case that there are 140 people there, all of whom are very bright with their own perspectives and so on, and some of them are incredibly conservative. Oh my gosh. The things like the abortion issues and so on. It's the anti-abortion bills oftentimes are introduced by women. So there are all kinds of opinions, but that's where it all gets hashed out in the legislative halls. I never was trying to set a record about how long I was going to be there. Candidly, I stayed a lot longer than I ever thought I would. But partly because I was having so much fun. I mean, we were making progress. 2020 and 2021 sessions were the most progressive in all my time there. We made so much progress in it. I would like to have stayed, but at some point your body says, you got to give this up and give it to someone else. But when I look around, I'm really delighted with what I see. I sat with 76 old white men in the beginning of my career, and now I sit with almost 50, the most diverse group you've ever believed. There were no black people when I went there, and now they're 6, 8, 10. I lose track. We don't count them anymore because it's so important. 1 or 2 women, and now women are. If you put together blacks, other minorities, and women, I'm in the minority. And I find that to be so reassuring, because now when we take up issues, we have a variety of opinions, a variety of experiences, and so on, that creates a better product and a more progressive Virginia. And I think we'll encourage people to want to stay in Virginia, add to it, so on. So those who are contemplating it, I say, look at me. I lost some elections, but I hung in there. It took me a while to get some things done, but I got some things done. So if it's what you decide you want to contribute, and for the very mass of people, we're a democratic republic, of course, because not everybody can go to Richmond and cast the votes. Some people get selected, so on. Certainly everybody has to vote and make their positions known on issues and so on. So I think what's happening is very healthy. And when I look at the composition, on the other half of the House, it's all white people except I think 1, and probably about a fourth now are women. Looks like it used to look in the past, and we are a party of the future, and I'm delighted.
So my generation, we've taken on the task of challenging incumbents in the party, in large part I think because we want to have a seat at the table and have our ideas and the issues that affect us heard. And sometimes I think we do a good job of that, other times not so much. And some of them have said they support things like age limits. That's not something I agree with. I really think it should be up to the voters, and I think that having a broad age range is part of diversity and having those diverse perspectives. So I'm curious if you have any advice for the younger generation looking to get involved and actually take up leadership positions. What would you recommend for them?
Thanks for that question, because I do feel strongly about the fact that in order to take on the honor of representing people in the legislature, you have to demonstrate who you are and what you stand for. And so if someone who says to me they're running for office and what they've done is simply work for the Democratic Party and that's all they've done, I'm not impressed. I'm impressed when people say, here's what I've done in my community, here are the people I've worked with, here's how I've been involved in my community and so on. That gives you a broad background of experience and so on and knowledge that you can build on when you get into the legislative process. So it's not as simple as saying, I'm running for office. It's to say, I've been doing these things in our community, and from this I gained this kind of knowledge, and I'm going to build on that. And while you're working in the community, you also get to know the people who are involved in making the decisions about who runs and who doesn't run. So it kind of emanates from that. I don't think that one being younger than one in office is a qualification for somebody. Should there be term limits? I say to people, there are term limits now. I had to stand for election every 2 years. My term was, the limit of my service was 2 years. And then I would re-up for another 2 years. And that's how I got success. But if voters decided that I was not competent, didn't reflect their views and so on, vote me out. That's how you limit people. But should you arbitrarily say to somebody, you can only serve 10 years or whatever the number of years is? My experience in talking to legislators from other states that have term limits like that is that that gives up the power to the bureaucracy to run things, because as soon as somebody gets some seniority, they're out of office. So there's always new people coming in. And so who runs the place? The people who are there in the bureaucracy, as opposed to the elected people who should make those decisions. So I'm not in favor of term limits. In terms of age limit, show your stuff. If you got the stuff in order to be elected, then you can be elected.
Yeah, I imagine having term limits also contributes to a broader swing. We tend to go through different social and cultural movements, and that could potentially swing a legislature more. So one thing that I brought up when talking with my fellow young progressives, that instead of like an age limit, that's something that could help make the process more fair, especially in Virginia, was campaign finance reform. Oh, yeah. Because it can take a lot of money to run, and maybe someone has a lot of ties in the community, but they're going to get blown out of the water by a billionaire with one single check. And we have had that happen in Virginia. We've had some elections where one person signed a check for like $400,000 to $700,000. Right.
Oh yeah, it's out of hand. I mean, our ability to be able to come to a consensus on how that should be handled was not achieved. I'm confident that those who follow me will continue to work on it and so on. I always prided myself on that. I always had one of the largest numbers of individual contributors of anybody there, because I was as proud of somebody who gave me $25 as someone who gave me $1,000 or $2,500. In terms of really enormous checks, I never got any. I never solicited any of them. And if someone wanted to give me a check that big, I'd look really suspicious as to what they had in mind, because I'm not for sale. And so voters insisting on how their own representatives handle the finances, one of the things that can bring about reform. But there are instances now where the governor apparently has, like on a weekend or something, raised $14 million. And in some close races, he's dropping $1 million in the close race. That's out of kilter. That's money running the place, and it's not a good situation.
So we have a couple minutes left. I'm curious if you feel, after 44 years and accomplishing so much, especially the last 5 years, I think there were some things you started in your early career, and you were finally able to get them passed. Do you feel like you have any unfinished business?
Oh, yeah. It's a continuing stream, and I have to just step out of the stream right now, but there's a lot of work to be done. You just mentioned campaign finance reform. It's really what we need to do. Public education, we make some progress, but we were so far behind. The progress we made still leaves us short. Mental health is a major, major issue for our community, and we don't do nearly enough in that regard. Yes, I've been part of nudging us along in some regards, but we have a long ways to go. So, yeah, I'm not leaving because the job got done. I'm leaving because it's someone else's turn to take it on and move forward. But I expect to continue to make my suggestions and so on to those people who follow me.
And what is the accomplishment, or maybe there's more than one, that you're most proud of in all of your time?
One we haven't mentioned, I'll just give you an idea of some of the exciting things you get involved with. When I was first elected, there was a fella in Fairfax who pointed out to me, he had a child who was severely developmentally delayed. And he pointed out to me that the little spot of blood that they take from an infant can make so many predictions about what it is that might affect someone. And so Virginia now has one of the most extensive metabolic disease testing system where they take that single spot of blood and they can make 50 different analyses of it. And from that determine what kind of early intervention you can have from the child so the child will grow up to be normal. I was involved in all that. I introduced the first bill on biotinidase deficiency. A medical researcher at University at the Virginia Commonwealth University found that out. We were the first locality in the world to do this. But if you find out that the child has a problem assimilating biotin, $25 a year in vitamin pills will give them a normal life. Without that early intervention and treatment, they end up severely retarded in early years. I'm proud of that.
So I solicited some questions from our audience, and mostly everyone wanted to tell you thank you for your service, and they didn't want you to retire. So I'm going to reiterate that and say thank you for serving Virginia so long. And thank you all in the audience for being with us here tonight. That's all, and you can have a wonderful evening. We will see you next week on the Inside Scoop.